Before you spend another dollar updating your home to sell it, make sure you listen to this. Most sellers waste thousands of dollars on upgrades that buyers don't want, or worse, that actually lowers the home's appeal. I've seen sellers drop $40,000 on solar, $75,000 on pools, and tens of thousands, if not more, on remodels, only to watch buyers walk away, or in some cases lowball them because they felt like the upgrades weren't worth it. Have you ever wondered which updates actually hurt your home's value when it comes time to sell? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into in today's episode. My goal is to educate homeowners on which common home upgrades are bad investments before selling their home. Ultimately, I want to help you avoid costly mistakes that don't offer a meaningful return, and in some cases could even scare off potential buyers. Now, with that said, I want to be clear, some upgrades are a personal decision. People do them, sellers do them because they want them in the home. They're not doing them for an ROI. So if that's your reason for doing these upgrades, then by all means do them. But at the same time, if you're one of those sellers who thinks that you're doing these upgrades because it's going to add value to your home, because you think buyers are going to love it, then make sure you watch until the end, because we're going to go over why I believe these things could not only impact your value in a negative way, but could ultimately push some buyers away. And the very first one I want to talk about is something that's really, really hot out there in the market at the moment, and that is solar. Solar seems like a really, really good idea in many cases because it's going to lower your utility bill. You're actually going to pay less on your electric, or in some cases no money at all, because you have these solar panels installed. But my opinion is, unless you plan on staying in that house for an extended period of time, then having solar never actually pays off. And that's because it takes most systems somewhere between 10 and 20 years to recoup that cost. So this is not an ideal investment for short-term homeowners. So if you're only planning on being in that home for a couple of years and you're installing solar because you think the next buyer is going to want it, because you think it's going to pay off in the short run, the reality is it's not going to, especially if that system is leased or financed. And that's because when you go to sell that home, that buyer now has to take over that payment, which means they now have to qualify for that lease or that loan. And on top of that, they have to be willing to assume it. And in my experience, many buyers out there don't want solar, which ultimately reduces your buyer pool. I can tell you story after story of buyers who were looking at property only to find out that the solar was leased and or financed, and it ultimately killed the deal. In some cases, the warranty wasn't transferable, and in other cases, the buyers didn't qualify. Now, I have had buyers who have bought property that had solar leases and or payments, and they were able to take them over no problem. I've also been on the other end of it, where the solar panels actually had to be removed in order to end up closing on that home. Now, for a very, very long time, I was completely against solar, if I'm being honest. And it's not because the idea is bad, but in my opinion, it rarely makes sense for most people out there. If you're one of those people that's paying $25,000, $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 for solar. In fact, my lender just had a client who had a $75,000 solar install. And think about it, if that seller had a $500 utility bill every single month, it would take 150 months or over 12 years to recoup that cost. But the reality is most utility bills are not $500 and most solar installs are not $75,000. But what I can tell you more often than not is that it takes somewhere between 10 and 20 years for that investment to actually make sense. And I know what you're saying out there. All these solar companies, they have warranties. They're going to come out and replace the panels. They're going to do work. Well, the reality is most of these companies are folding after 5 to 10 years, which means your warranty is no longer valid. In addition to that, if you ever have to have work on your house, if you ever have to replace the roof or you have leaks and something has to be done, well, many times those solar panels have to be removed in order to complete that work, which could end up adding thousands in additional costs. So unless you're someone who plans on staying in your house forever, which if you're watching this video, you're probably not, you're probably a seller, then I would say adding solar to your house probably doesn't make sense. Now, the next thing I want to talk about are swimming pools. Now, this can go either way. You typically have people that absolutely want a swimming pool, or you have the other side where people absolutely don't want a swimming pool. Rarely do you find someone in the middle. But the reality is pools can cost a lot to build and a lot to maintain. And the best part is they only add marginal value to a home. In my experience, the average pool install here in Southern California is probably somewhere between $60,000 and $100,000. And the ROI on that is typically less than 50%, even if the pool just got built. And as a real estate agent for over 20 years, I've seen a large portion of buyers, especially those with kids, see pools as a safety hazard, which in turn impacts buyer demand. I often talk to buyers who do not want a swimming pool. And that's because of the kid thing. Sometimes they just want a yard, they want something low maintenance, which means you're rarely going to get that ROI. Now, if it's one of those things that you're doing for yourself personally, for your kids, for your family, then like I said at the beginning of the video, it doesn't matter about the ROI because it's all about you getting enjoyment out of it. In fact, I've been in that position where I owned a home back in 2004 where we ended up building a swimming pool to that home. I don't remember the exact cost, but it was somewhere around $75,000. You want to hear the best part? We ended up selling that property about 4 to 6 months later after completion because in all reality, we didn't really enjoy the neighborhood that we were living in and we thought adding a pool was going to help us enjoy it. And guess what? It didn't change anything. So the reality is we could have saved about $50,000 by not adding that pool because our time frame was so short. So as someone here telling you which upgrades you shouldn't do, some of these things I have done myself and I'm trying to help you avoid them. Other things I've had happen with both sellers and buyers. So I'm trying to help you learn through experience, which puts me into talking about over improving your house for the neighborhood. I see a lot of buyers out there at the moment creating the nicest house in their neighborhood. But the reality is that's not really a flex that you want to have. And that's because oftentimes you're not going to get credit for those upgrades if the comps around you can't support it. In my experience, many buyers out there don't want to pay top dollar for a home where there's no room to actually improve that home. And on top of that, one of the things I'm seeing a lot of is this HGTV syndrome where people are mixing styles. They're adding farmhouse, they're adding a little bit of industrial, and they're also doing this whole mid-century thing. And the one thing it's doing is it's creating confusion, not appeal. The reality is you want to be in line with your neighborhood, not above it. Let buyers see potential for adding value. The last thing they want is a home that they actually have to undo, where you spent a lot of money on upgrades that they don't care for, or in some case were done in bad taste. Now, the next one I want to talk about is people over customizing the outdoor space. They're adding outdoor kitchen. They're adding everything to hardscape where there's absolutely no grass or area for kids or pets to run around. And on top of that, custom barbecues and patios can cost somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 depending on what you're doing. And if that wasn't enough, it's expensive to maintain and even harder to modify or remove if a buyer doesn't like it. And one thing I've noticed about outdoor spaces is that the trend changes a lot more often than the interior of the property. And so the last thing a buyer wants to do is buy a property where someone spent a lot of money redoing the outside and now they have to modify or change it. Because what I can tell you as someone who has bought a house where a seller has spent a lot of money on particular upgrades that they liked, that I didn't like, I felt really, really bad ripping this stuff out. And while you might love your $15,000 barbecue and all your hardscape, just don't expect buyers to. I've seen way too many buyers walk through elaborate yards and say, this is way too much work. Now, the next one I want to talk about is converting square footage into unusable space or into space that most people aren't going to enjoy. Like taking 2 bedrooms, taking down the wall and making it one giant bedroom, where now when it goes to sell that home, instead of having 4 bedrooms, now you have 3, or from 3 to 2 because you've taken down a wall, or in some cases taking a bedroom and transforming it entirely into a closet, which is what my house had. When we bought our property, it was technically a 4-bedroom house, but they were selling it as a 3-bedroom house because there was an entire room that was a closet, and they spent a lot of money on custom cabinets that we just ripped out. And what I'll tell you is it impacted buyer demand when they were originally showing that home. And it cost us a lot of money to rip out really nice things. So just remember, most buyers value room count and garage storage and space more than, say, an oversized closet. There's a lot of people out there at the moment, they're transforming their garages into ADUs. They're transforming their garages into additional bedrooms, which may fit their family. But what I'll tell you from experience is many buyers out there, they want a garage. They want to be able to pull their cars in it. They want to have their toys, their tools, all of that stuff in the garage. So if you've completely built it out, then what I'll tell you is that's likely going to impact the value of your home. Every time you remove livable square footage, you're actually narrowing your audience. So if we go with the idea that demand drives price, the less demand you have on a home could end up impacting the price you get for that home. Oftentimes when it comes to improvements, you have to think a little bit further in advance. You have to think of resale value. You don't want to get too customized on property. You don't want to take away attributes of a home that appeals to the masses. Because what I'll tell you from experience is it does impact your bottom line, which is another thing I see with people doing kitchen and bathroom remodels just to get more money for their home. They think by redoing kitchens and bathrooms, because that's typically what buyers are paying attention to, that they're going to end up getting more money for their home. But the reality is the average kitchen remodel is probably somewhere between $30,000 and $80,000. $1,000,000, with a return on investment often less than 60% of that. And that's because oftentimes when sellers are redoing these things just to sell their homes, they're only doing the bare minimum. They're not hiring a designer. They're not hiring an architect. They're not removing walls. They're just doing a facelift, like countertops. Sometimes they're painting the cabinets. Maybe they'll do custom cabinets, but rarely ever are they doing everything that a buyer wants in a home. And when they don't do these things, what happens is a buyer moves in and they end up ripping some of this stuff out anyway to make it how it should have been done in the first place. And that's because buyers often want their own style, especially in higher end markets. What I often see is quick flips on kitchens and bathrooms skip these layout improvements, which many savvy buyers out there recognize as superficial. They think that people just put lipstick on a pig, and they didn't actually do the work that was necessary to create that value that the seller thought they were adding. So what should you do if you're looking to sell your home? The number one thing you can do as a potential seller is declutter your property. The less things in that property, the more open it's going to feel, the larger it's going to feel, and it's going to help buyers see the opportunity in that home. On top of that, one of the really easy fixes for many properties out there is fresh paint. Paint the walls, paint the ceilings, paint the doors, paint the trim, paint everything, especially if you have dark or bold colors in your home. One of the other easy fixes is also to replace fixtures, replace lights, and do things like minor repairs and focus on the landscaping. You really want to focus on what adds perceived value without breaking the bank. And one way to do that is by talking to a real estate agent when you know you're going to sell your home before you actually do the upgrades. Ask them what they think, because they should know the comps in the area. They should know what the buyers are looking for and how much those upgrades are actually going to impact your value. Now, with that said, I would personally love to help you if you're looking at selling your home. You can get in touch with me using that link in the description. If I can't personally help you, I'll refer you to an agent across the country that works exactly like I do. Just use that link in the description below. The goal when selling your home is to make it feel fresh, functional, and move-in ready. It's not personalized, overbuilt, or in some cases overly fancy. You have to think that you want to appeal to the masses. That's how you get top dollar. Now, do me a favor, if you found any value in today's episode, hit that thumbs up. And if you want to stay updated on more videos like this on how to sell your home for top dollar, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel.